So, when asked if Hezbollah was a terrorist organization, the great Noam Chomsky replied in 2006, around the time frame of the Israel-Lebanon war, thusly.
أن حزب الله منظمة إرهابية.
The United States considers Hezbollah a terrorist organization, but the term terrorism is used by the great powers simply to refer to forms of violence of which they disapprove. So the U.S. was, of course, supporting the Israeli invasions and occupation of southern Lebanon. Hezbollah was instrumental in driving them out. So for that reason, they're terrorist organizations. And it's a reflection of the power of the imperial states, the United States and Europe, that they are able to shift the framework so that the problem appears to be Hamas's policies and not the more extreme policies of the United States and Israel. And we must remember that in their case, it's not just policies, it's not words, it's actions.
So, welcome back to Colonial Outcasts, a podcast that presents geopolitical and historical analysis from an anti-war, anti-imperialist perspective that will make your uncle incredibly and increasingly pissed and uncomfortable. My name is Greg Stoker. This is a more military-oriented episode. I'm a former U.S. Army Ranger. Today we are joined by series regulars Travis, a former field-grade artillery officer, and Alina Xenofontos, an analyst currently watching this insanity unfold from Cyprus. Thanks so much for coming on, y'all, on a Sunday.
Good to be here.
Yeah, good to be here.
Okay, so to talk about Hezbollah taking some serious body blows over the past 11 days, that's absolutely undeniable at this point, and what the situation looks like going forward. Has the strategic situation changed? Is Hezbollah infiltrated and compromised? How will it respond? Will Israel finally invade? What's up with this potential regional war of annihilation? What did Travis and I both learn about these things from misguidedly fighting in two illegal wars that didn't end well for the United States? Those are some things we're going to talk about on this episode. First, we are on Patreon for more content. We're completely demonetized on YouTube, so if you want to help us out that way, we're trying to get everybody paid for their contributions like an actual professional platform and build towards that. So check us out for extra stuff. And that's the end of the plug. And if you don't want to do that, if you could like, share, and subscribe and drive this through the algorithm, we'd also really appreciate you. We're just glad you're here. So first, we got to recap. The fighting between Israel and Hezbollah has escalated for nearly 2 weeks now. It began when Israeli intelligence detonated thousands of pagers, killing and injuring thousands of Hezbollah operatives and civilians in an operation that would have been roundly condemned as a catastrophic act of terror had Hezbollah conducted the same operation against Israeli military personnel. Again, as Noam Chomsky said, we determine the framework by which violence is considered acceptable. So it continued with a detonation of walkie-talkies or two-way handset radios at a series of funerals for the people killed the day before. And it continued with the targeted killings of senior Hezbollah officials and a wave of airstrikes on Lebanon, killing hundreds, overwhelmingly civilian, wounding thousands and displacing tens of thousands. And I would also like to reinforce the fact that Hezbollah is also a government and administrative entity. There are literally thousands upon thousands of Hezbollah civilians, administrators, bureaucrats, aid workers, like educators. So that's something that everybody needs to keep in mind as well. When they say the blanket term of Hezbollah, just like the blanket term of Hamas, that is something you have to bear in mind. So all of this peaked Friday evening when Israeli forces attacked the organization's headquarters in the heart of Beirut and killed its Secretary General, Hassan Nasrallah, who had led Hezbollah since 1992, when his predecessor, Abbas al-Musawi, was killed by Israeli missiles. So, first of all, September 7th, we got the pager attack. September 18th, walkie-talkies explode. September 19th, a bombing campaign spreads into southern Lebanon just before midnight with the IDF spokesperson, Hagari, announcing that the Israeli Air Force had begun a wave of widespread attacks across Lebanon. They put out a huge propaganda push saying that a CGI predominantly AI-driven image campaign portraying ballistic missiles, like multi-ton ballistic missiles inside homes, inside kitchens, inside the second story of apartments. Like, how did you get that missile up there? Did you have a series of cranes? And how are you going to shoot a ballistic missile out of there without taking down the entire structure? Anyways, it was a massive, silly propaganda push. And September 20th, Israel kills the head of Hezbollah's operations and the de facto commander of its elite Radwan force during a meeting in his home in the heart of Beirut. September 21st, they did a series of quote unquote preventative attacks or preemptive strikes on targets that we don't really know what they were. They're going to be predominantly civilians because, as you notice, the trend of how the Israeli military operates. 24th, more assassinations. 26th, more. And then 27th, 2 days ago, Nasrallah was killed. He was killed alongside a number of other commanders in the Daya doctrine. Probably about there was a collateral damage of about 500 people killed because they dropped the entire neighborhood, six like an entire block of a neighborhood with at least 2,000-pound bombs. One of the commanders was General Abbas Nilforushan of the IRGC. The Air Force attacked several other buildings after warning residents of attack. According to Israeli propaganda, but according to my sources in Beirut, there was no warning because obviously there was no warning. So a lot of quote unquote collateral damage, which implies that the IDF only reluctantly killed civilians. But of course, we know that not to be true. So was the U.S. involved? And before we break out into a conversation, let's hear from Sabrina Singh, the deputy spokesperson for the Pentagon, who is literally married into the U.S. security establishment. Here we go.
Sides to not escalate the situation.
This is from 2 days ago, after the attack on Nasrallah. And you can see, if you're not watching the video, you're only listening to the audio version of this podcast. We are looking at Sabrina Singh cut with an image of the absolutely massive airstrike that happened in the Daya doctrine, not the Daya doctrine, which is in play, but the Daya neighborhood of Lebanon. And it's an absolutely insane amount of ordnance. And that's what we're seeing right now.
Is this an escalation?
Yeah, again, that remains to be seen. We're still assessing.
6 apartment buildings in the suburbs of Beirut have been leveled. That's not, you have to assess whether that's an escalation?
You're telling me that. I do not know that to be true. So again, we are still assessing the situation. We are going to continue to have our calls with the Israelis to get more details. I appreciate the question. I hope you would also appreciate that this just happened a few hours ago. So yes, we are still doing an assessment. Rio.
So I think it's always amazing how the Pentagon seems to be always so uninformed of Israeli military actions. And my first question is for you, Travis. What do you think about that? Do you buy that we had no knowledge of the attack, that we didn't apply targeting data?
No, I highly doubt that. I mean, it's possible, but we know that there's a significant intelligence participation. That's always been true. The very fact that it's U.S. ordnance in the first place, and you would have to assume that assassination of a leader of that level has to be at least communicated, if not cleared. I don't think they're asking for our permission. When I say our, I mean the United States administration, not me, obviously. But I don't think they're asking for permission. Or haven't asked for permission very much the whole time. Our administration looks pretty neutered when it comes to actually controlling what Israel does, but not coordinating, at least, that they're going to do this in the first place. But I think it'd be pretty wild.
Yeah, and
they've done it before. However, they've done insanely impactful, for lack of a better word, rogue actions without coordination before. It's happened before.
Yeah, and so there are a couple of open source intelligence accounts that monitor AWACS and flights and ships, as you know. And I've kind of confirmed this. The U.S. Air Force's AWAC aircraft, which are an early warning and control system that provides radar, signal intelligence support, command and control and battle space aerial engagements, and overground surveillance for the U.S. and partners, were apparently off the coast of Cyprus at the same time. That's just something to keep in mind about, only a few miles outside of Beirut. So they're flying out of Khania in Crete, and we're just in the region at the time. Just wanted to put that out there. Yeah, so we do have targeting cells in Israel. We've established that, and we do use our air assets to perform intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance for the Israeli military. So I think that's well established. We can assume Lloyd Austin had a phone call with Yoav Gallant the day before. We know that Benjamin Netanyahu ordered the strike while right when he was speaking at the UN. He gave it the green light. That's what we're hearing, and that's been all but confirmed. So I do think U.S. participation is definitely, absolutely there. I think we can make that assumption. And then the statements by Biden and Harris backing Israel completely and unconditionally remain intact. Now, second question is for you, Alita. We talked about this when this happened. They have been able to effectuate a bunch of massive attacks with the pager attack, which was an intelligence coup, and then they basically dismantled significant figures within their entire command structure. So the question on the street is Hezbollah compromised?
Well, that is the big question. That is the big question. It's difficult to assess. I mean, I've been trying to get a conclusive answer on this myself. I mean, on the one hand, you could argue that, this could be the result of more sophisticated surveillance mechanisms on behalf of Israel, and they were able to somewhat maybe locate an estimation of particularly where Nasrallah was, and then systematically strike with these, heavy duty 2,000-pound bombs, or apparently some say more. I'm not particularly sure. I mean, they made a hole of 50 meters down into the earth to essentially kill Nasrallah and all these sort of senior commanders, including some from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. So, I mean, that could be a possibility. But what is indeed most concerning is the fact that there seem to be security breaches. They would, and it's not just with what's happened now in the last week within Hezbollah, but also what's happened when Haniyeh was killed in Tehran. So there seems to be a bit of a discrepancy that's occurring in the axis. And if this is indeed the case, and it's not dealt with, it's concerning what this could mean for the axis going forward. Because just going back to what you guys were speaking about, this in antithesis to what the Pentagon is saying, this is an escalation. It's a very serious escalation. And at this particular point, I mean, we have, Hassan Nasrallah. He wasn't just the leader of Hezbollah, the military faction. He was a prominent revolutionary figure for the people of Lebanon, for the region, particularly an anti-Zionist figure for that part. And as you said, Hezbollah is also a political organization within Lebanon. This is a direct attack against the entirety of the Lebanese sort of governmental structures, as well as everything else, and what this means for the entire region going forward. So when you have this kind of escalation, we know, and the United States knows, that we're speaking almost, I would say, no uncertain terms about a greater regional war. And as this is going to go forward, the Axis cannot afford to have loopholes. End of story. No moles. No, this needs to be addressed. And I have yet to find accurate information or any sort of information coming out of the Axis to what happened with the pagers, with the walkie-talkies, and with regards to Nasrallah.
No, I definitely think they're having to review their entire security, operational security architecture, and there's probably a spy hunt ongoing. So, Travis, let's look at this IDF. I mean, it's IDF propaganda, but all these guys are confirmed to be killed. This was posted to the account of Preston Stewart. He's a former military guy. He does analysis, I guess, but he definitely toes the line of U.S. foreign policy and reinforces it. So, yeah, but we're looking at this entire command hierarchy, which is basically like a network target set, and we are just seeing all these senior commanders killed. What do you think when you see this? Essentially,
I mean, I think they're going to declare success there, and I think from an intelligence standpoint, targeting senior leadership standpoint, whatever that mission requirement was, I think you can't argue that wasn't a successful strike on their part. appalling in how it was executed, of course. That said, I don't think, God, it's really hard to give them credit. I hate it coming out of my mouth. But that said, I think on these types of organizations, I think it's very limited effect. I mean, this Hezbollah is an organization designed to fight in fragmented cells. It's designed to survive decapitation strikes because it happens to them so frequently, right? The Israelis use targeted assassination more than anybody I'm aware of, and so the organizations that combat them have to be capable of surviving that. You saw if you looking at the white paper from 2006, the way they fight. They were fighting in cells that were able to fragment, disperse, and then recoalesce on a target, perform an attack, and then disperse again. This is clearly an organization that's capable of operating in a decentralized fashion. And so when you have organizations that are designed to stay alive and continue fighting in a decentralized fashion, decapitation strikes don't work on them nearly as well.
You're right. And one thing I would like to say about this IDF propaganda chart of all these commanders that are killed, this is a cherry pick list. They're making it seem like their entire command structure is now gone. No, these are just the guys that they chose to present as targeted and killed. That doesn't mean there's no one in leadership and it's completely.
Yeah, they're showing this guy got killed and he reported to that guy. They're not showing the other 14 guys that reported to the same person above them. Like there's another 13 next to them that are still not dead. Right. Like anyone who's ever worked on brigade or division staff knows that all of these staff cells have multiple officers in them. So that's ridiculous. Yeah, I agree.
Right. And so, but it's being presented not just in the Israeli media, but in our own media by certain war hawks that this is the end. And we need to now support Israel more than ever because Hezbollah is on the ropes. Here is one of my least favorite people. You need to get used to seeing him, though, because this is Tom Cotton. He is a Republican senator and former United States Army veteran. He is a complete neocon asshole on the bomb Iran camp, no matter what, no matter how devastating it would be for American interests in the region. And he's probably being groomed to be the successor of Trump for the Republican Party on the next presidential ticket. Anyways, Tom Cotton.
I'm not sure that Israel's expanding the war so much as it is trying to end the war. I think it's important to stress just what a huge blow the last 2 weeks have been against Hezbollah. Iran is behind all of these terror networks, but Hezbollah is its most potent weapon. Hezbollah has over 100,000 rockets and missiles and mortars aimed at Israel. Iran has used that threat to deter Israel for years, going back probably 20 years or so. And now that Israel has absolutely devastated the entire leadership structure of Hezbollah, whether it's at the attacks that came just late last week, killing not only Hassan Nasrallah and all the other leaders, or some of their other actions, or hitting their weapons depots and manufacturing sites in Syria, now is not the time for a ceasefire or to de-escalate as Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want. Hezbollah is on its knees. The United States should help Israel drive Hezbollah to the mat and choke it out and finish it off once and for all. That means for the first time in decades, Iran would be exposed on its flanks with no terror proxy capable of devastating Israel or our troops and our friends in the region. That's what we should do, not demand that we have a ceasefire, de-escalate at a time when Israel is trying to win. We should let Israel win.
Certainly a lot to unpack there. It seems like Elena wants to respond.
No, I mean, I applaud him for the fact that he's quite frankly just laying out what the imperialist agenda is behind the entire operation that's taking place right now within Western Asia, with the opportunity of the genocide in Gaza, because this is essentially what it's geared towards, right? He's very right in stating that Hezbollah has been at the front lines of sort of protecting, not even protecting, but I guess sort of countering the Zionist colonial project, but also Western imperialism in the region. And that was sort of manifested itself with everything that happened and broke out in Syria as well, because Hezbollah was in Syria and they were countering a lot of the Mossad agents and the ISIS units and the sort of more controversial units that were, I guess, Western sponsored to overthrow Bashar al-Assad in Syria, fundamentally because obviously Syria, whatever, again, this is irrelevant to what people's opinions are about Bashar al-Assad, which is another very complex topic. But Syria in of itself, because the Bashar al-Assad, he provided for the last 20 years, and I've said this before, he has provided Hezbollah with a base, is including the entirety of the axis in terms of production of weaponry, but also intelligence within the region. And so one of the reasons that Bashar al-Assad needed to be overthrown, among many others, was to debilitate Hezbollah, because Hezbollah counters Western imperialism within the region. If Hezbollah falls, and this is an actual truth, if Hezbollah falls, the axis will become far easier to overcome within the region. And when that happens, the ultimate aim is Iran. And I think this has been something that has been part of the imperialists in the West's foreign policy since pretty much 1979, whether it be through sanctions warfare, which is economic warfare meant to deplete Iran by the imposition of collective punishment, or whether it's trying to essentially strategize within the region so as to slowly eliminate any sort of opposition and sort of contain Iran. Because, and I will just say this like very quickly, like even if you look at the, when you look at the beyond what's happened in Syria, even the war on terror in Iraq, although Saddam Hussein had his own particular disputes, and this goes without saying with Iran, however, taking control over Iraq, then the idea of taking control over Yemen through the Saudi, UK, and US-led operation against the Yemeni people, as well as obviously, like I said, yes, Syria, all of this boils down to trying to encircle Iran. They are the ultimate desire for Western imperialists.
Yeah, I would say one more thing, and this is something like I feel like some people, and a lot of people, are just educating themselves about this and how U.S. foreign policy functions, and they're just it's not just, there's a reason why. There's an overriding philosophy to U.S. foreign policy as it's been practiced since the post-World War II era, and we became the global superpower. And since the fall of the Soviet Union, we're kind of unchallenged in that regard. The U.S. establishment, there's this idea of exceptionalism baked into it, that we do not tolerate peers well. And not only do we not tolerate peers well, we despise regional hegemons, and we have to break them up. And that's so that we can dominate a region. That's why, and that's done through isolation and sanctions and military bases. So the same thing, a regional hegemon like Iran, which is an entirely problematic government from my perspective, but the way we've handled it has been singularly horrific. With the first beginning with the coup, which reinstalled the Shah, and then the Iraq War, which
I was gonna say we had no small hand in creating it, so we can't.
Yeah, but it all boils down to the United States overriding drive for security interests. We do not tolerate regional hegemons, and Iran is the potentially, if it's able to challenge Israel, a potential regional hegemon fighting for spheres of influence within the Middle East. Someone like Tom Cotton, who is a neocon hawk, will never be able to tolerate that. So under his post, I just made it. I'm about to ratio him in likes on his own post. No big deal. But I said, and hopefully you can piggyback off this, Travis, this neocon hawk fought in Iraq and Afghanistan and managed to learn nothing from those wars. Hezbollah has taken some body blows, but isn't going anywhere. Remember during the surge, and I mean the Afghan surge, we rolled up the entire Haqqani network, essentially, in Afghanistan, captured Haji Mali Khan, who was the uncle of Jalaluddin Haqqani, and how did that all turn out? They didn't go anywhere. They didn't stop existing, and then they joined up with the Taliban, and there's more stronger than ever. So that's just one thing I wanted to point out.
I would argue he did learn. I think he did learn, but he learned something. He learned something horrific, which is that with enough political control, you can manufacture a war, get it kicked off, and fund it for 20 years. You can keep sending American men and women into a combat zone that never should have existed. Keep burning American taxpayer resources for your own financial ends, and you can do that for 20 years, and hell, you can do two at the same time, right? I did want to tack on to what Alina said. Totally agree with the U.S. attacks encircling Iran, and then also capped off with the assassination of Soleimani, right? Like that was the most recent one. We're looking at Israel killing Nasrallah, and it wasn't that long ago that the U.S. administration killed assassinated Soleimani in Iraq. So pretty blatant. But yeah, Greg, I totally agree. Like we should have learned from the last two 20-year excursions that happened at the same time. And what do we have out of that right now? In Afghanistan, absolutely nothing. In Iraq, like maybe some influence over the current government. Like, and if that's what you get after 20 years and that expenditure and that much blood, and not even to mention the hundreds of thousands of Iraqi dead and the destruction to their lives and their communities. But yeah, what did you get out of the end there? I don't know what.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think the common denominator here is when you look at it from the angle of imperialism, but when you assess it sort of economically and how the sort of ruling class, the bourgeois class, is essentially capitalizing on all of this. And I think there you can actually find a lot of the reasons as to why they function in the modes that they function. So if, for example, you mentioned the Afghanistan war. The Afghanistan war, even of the last 20 years, I mean, we know how much money was essentially the concept of endless war. I mean, again, the military-industrial complex made a significant amount of affluence off of continuously funding this particular project, and all these sort of security and private security companies, including sort of the finance capital that was essentially flowing through Afghanistan as a form of money laundering. So this made billions, even more than that for the financial corporate elite. So that it's not about actually achieving a particular goal. I mean, in terms of success, in terms of security, because in actuality, destabilization is one of the modus operandi of the imperial ruling class. Because by destabilizing Afghanistan, which at one point was going to be, for example, a socialist communist state, and then they funded the Mujahideen, and through the Mujahideen, they saw that sort of overthrow. And actually, the Taliban is very much rooted in a sort of extremist Mujahideen that was funded at the time by the United States. But this sort of extremist governments or sort of organizations that say that they create then allows them to also then continuously find opportunities as pretext for war, which then means more money for them. So it's always about, you got to follow sort of like the money trial. And even when it comes to Iran, the only thing I would say is like, I'm very careful, like when I use words like hegemon, because Iran isn't really a regional hegemon in the context of, it doesn't really have much influence. But hegemon means, by definition, like in the imperialist sense, having some sort of economic ability to extract from their neighbors and in an exploitative way, which Iran doesn't. I mean, it's a country that's struggling, to be honest, for the most part in itself because of the sanctions. But the biggest issue that they have, the reason they want to bring down Iran, and this has nothing to do with the theocracy of Iran. I mean, because that's another very interesting topic in itself. For example, actually, the Iranian Revolution initially began as a socialist movement by the Tudeh party, and then it was essentially hijacked by the Islamists. So there's a very interesting case to be said about that. But the fact is that they want to take control over Iran because not only is it rich in resources, but also its trade routes, its connections, and its location is paramount at controlling the global economy. And that is what it all boils down to, because as an imperialist, you want to monopolize capital so much so that then you are able to continuously extract. You cannot have anybody else preventing that extraction, because ultimately the innate contradictions of capitalism will always cause it to collapse. So they need to constantly find ways to counter that. And this is some of those ways. So it's always follow the money. I always say, follow the money and you'll get your answers.
That's a great point, especially talking about Iraq. That's a great point, because like some people did profit massively from the Iraq war. Halliburton, right, whose former CEO was Dick Cheney, right? Halliburton made, I think, the most money of any of the companies, and the second was Kellogg, Brown and Root. Same thing, all of those military contracts. I mean, let's call it what they've called it since the Civil War. They're war profiteers, and the war profiteering was unbelievable. I think it was unprecedented in Iraq. I think it had never been done to that scale before. That's when KBR and Halliburton, I can't remember which company, got busted running empty trucks back and forth and charging the U.S. government for the convoys. And oh, by the way, U.S. soldiers had to protect those convoys. They were empty trucks. Like the war profiteering in the Iraq war alone was insane, to the level that it occurred.
Well, I will add one more thing. I wouldn't say it's simply about resources extraction. We are chained to the destiny of Israel as a nation the United States is. And Iran is the only country that can counter Israeli impunity in the region. And that is incredibly threatening to the far-right government that has existed in Israel in various modes and forms, basically since its inception. So that's something else to keep in mind. And that's one of the reasons, again, coming back to Hezbollah, the biggest threat to Israeli impunity is Iran, but through an extension, as Tom Cotton himself said, Hezbollah. So now that
they're also the ones that have fought. They're the ones whose military forces are veteran against the IDF. They fought the IDF. They've, by certain circles, again, the U.S. Pentagon thinks this, they beat the IDF in open fighting in 2006. So their existence proves lie to IDF invincibility, and it's kind of symbolic. I think at least it has a high symbolic value in the region as well as. They're the ones that have been standing on that border since then.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to make a quick additional point. Like just to build on what you guys said, Israel is like a huge surveillance military asset for the U.S. in many ways, in a region that is very geostrategically significant. So, I mean, even Cyprus, which is small, but it's right next door, had so much U.S. Involvement because they consider it to be the permanent aircraft carrier in the Middle East. I mean, we're currently occupied, divided, and we've had wars, and I mean, Cyprus is in a particular situation where a war could erupt at any particular moment due to the sort of impact of foreign influences. Why? Because by being strategically located in the Middle East, close to the Suez Canal, etc., having control over this particular island allows you to assert authority. It's the same thing with Israel in many ways. Israel is it's a very significant. It's very significant for the U.S. elites always.
And so it seems that in order to ensure their security, Hezbollah must be defeated. And now, in order to get to the crux of what's going on, I have pulled up a WAPO article that was just released like a few minutes ago. It says, Israel eyes Lebanon offensive with lessons learned from the past invasions. Now, as you know, the Israeli Defense Force has never been successful in southern Lebanon. They're kicked out by Hezbollah. They tried to reinvade again. Didn't work. It's never worked. And this is actually coming out of the WAPO from Tel Aviv. It's written by Loveday Morris. It's a hell of a name. And we have to keep in mind that WAPO, or the Washington Post, has the most three-letter agency people working and writing for it out of any publication that exists. And so now is Israel.
I'm just pulling lines out of this as you scroll, and I'm like, that's not true. That's not true. That's not.
Yeah. And so I think I think we should just go through it. And it says, now as Israel prepares for another potential ground invasion, its military and security establishment appear to have absorbed the lessons of the past. Really? Because you've been unsuccessful in Gaza. Just leaving that there. Any of this vein that they're talking in, like they're unprepared for complex ground operations. Then you're unprepared for complex ground operations now. They've been training since 2006. No, you haven't. You have a 2-year rotating conscript system. Your soldiers are as green as they ever were, and your leaders are still 25-year-olds. No, you look no different than you do in 2006. Tanks exploding. You think the anti-tank weapon game has gotten better for tanks since 2006? I got news for you. That ain't true.
And to be honest, I mean, all they've done in the last 10 days, okay, pager explosions, walkie-talkies explosions, and then bomb the south of Lebanon into like oblivion. That's pretty much the same sort of tactic they used in 2006, those airstrikes, and that didn't even work, then that's why they needed to do the ground invasion in the first place, where they categorically failed. So in what way have they learned lessons? I don't know. But let's see what you cannot
airstrike. You cannot defeat insurgencies from the sky. Like literally anyone who knows any military history at all by now should know that it's not possible. You can't do that.
Yeah, and they're still doing the same things.
Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, Gaza. Lebanon, 06. Like, how many examples do you need? You cannot bomb your way out of insurgencies. It's not possible.
You forgot like the Houthis in Yemen. I wouldn't,
Yeah, I shouldn't have left them out because they literally got bombarded for how many years now? And they're in charge. So good job, guys. Good job. You bombed them into being in charge.
we bombed the Taliban into being in charge. Again, also, in order to take ground and defeat an insurgency, you have to get out of your tanks and armored personnel carriers, which
that's why they're not ready for complex anything. I have yet to see a combined armor dismounted infantry operation yet. I have not seen one yet.
Yes.
And if you're not doing that, then you lack the complete fundamentals of ground operations, of combined arms ground operations. You can't do that. And that is some basic, to use the football term, some basic blocking and tackling. You can't do that, then you can't army. Sorry, guys.
You literally can't army. Well, over the past 10 days, Israel has targeted and crippled Hezbollah's logistics and communications infrastructure, taken out key weapon stores, and eliminated its senior commanders, including Nasrallah. So the brazen attacks have stunned Hezbollah. I wouldn't disagree with that. I'm going to disagree with the next part.
I disagree with the second piece. Until somebody shows me something, and then I'll say I'm wrong. But I haven't seen any significant impact to their logistics systems, because their logistics systems aren't buildings. Like, those are networks, and I don't know. I don't buy that one on its face, but okay.
Okay, humiliating a group whose reason to be is to fight Israel, but they
you're telling me Hezbollah right now can't get arms and ammo from wherever it's coming into a frontline trench? Because I don't buy that. I don't believe you. I believe they
get it in from Syria, and they can't even control the borders in Syria. So how the hell they're going to restock easy, especially through their tunnels, which are very sophisticated and quite extensive.
Yeah, I don't buy impact of blocking.
Yeah, but there is also evidence of Israel's years of preparation, including intelligence collection, military exercises. Okay, intelligence collection, yes, they have the most advanced spyware. It's now becoming increasingly AI-driven with target generation based off of that. But again, they've had success because they are like the world's leader in this kind of spyware. They're also
sure. But you either one of two things is true. You got surprise attacked like Hamas on October 7th. And your intelligence service is actually not nearly as good as you say it is, or you knew about it. You tell me which one's true. So
yeah. Well, you guys can like duke that out in the comments section, because that's definitely beyond this.
Or you did know about it. Which is it?
Yeah, so we'd be interested in your thoughts in the comments section, but that is a great point. It's also beyond the scope of this. But
yeah, I was gonna say that as well. I have a whole theory, but we'll leave that.
Yeah. So Hezbollah had assembled its own arsenal of 150,000 rockets, yada, yada, yada. But it's unclear now how effectively the group can use them with its leadership wiped out. Again, we've established that there are still commanders in place. Just because the IDF has cherry-picked a kill list doesn't mean it's like completely gone. It's just a bunch of Joes running around who, don't even know how to blow their nose or whatever. But with its leadership wiped out and thousands of operatives either killed or injured, how are they going to work? Despite the blows, however, Israel is still haunted by its past missteps in Lebanon. Olmert, the prime minister during the 2006 invasion, said that a ground offensive in the current conflict wasn't necessary, with Hezbollah so crippled that it would probably capitulate and agree to a ceasefire deal that's favorable to Israel. Alina, you want to take that one?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, look, they keep saying the same thing. It also happened in 1992 when they killed Abbas al-Musawi as well. Yeah. Like, okay, this was it. Hezbollah is destroyed. We've killed sort of the brains. We never have to deal with Hezbollah again. Then Nasrallah comes in. He makes Hezbollah into an entirely new, different beast in terms of its military capabilities, but also its political capabilities, and the way it actually has managed also to sort of restructure Lebanese society. They're going to keep saying the same things over and over again, that yes, Hezbollah has been depleted. It was depleted in 2006, and then they basically went in the ground invasion, and then they got throttled by 3,000 Hezbollah fighters. I mean, it's just the same narrative on repeat, so that they don't appear to give themselves sort of an aesthetic power, sort of a power move, let's just say. But it's going to fade very soon. And just to add on to a point that you guys already said, it's also ridiculous to assume that even if you killed a certain amount of their commanders, that there aren't people already prepared, trained to take the reins immediately. Like I think Travis said earlier on, this is a resistance movement. This is a resistance organization. They are fully aware of the fact that they could most likely be targeted and killed at any particular moment. They are prepared for this, and they have people that are ready to take the reins. And once the extensive airstrikes stop, because they're not going to consistently be able to do that for a plethora of reasons, including the fact that we have particular shortages within sort of the Western military realm of things, even for the United States, according to like some sort of reports that came out of the Pentagon just like a week ago. That's when the ground invasion is going to have to happen, because they know too well that Hezbollah has not been depleted, and that's why they're going to be forced to have a ground invasion. And when they do, well, that's where Hezbollah is waiting for them. That's their strong suit, and that's where it's going to get very interesting.
Yeah, and Hamas was completely decentralized with only dual phase RPGs, and they've been able to take out a lot of tanks. But that's what Olmert says. A ground invasion is not necessary. However, Netanyahu has vowed to carry on striking Hezbollah.
They have to say that. They have to say the ground invasion. This is where they move the goalpost of what victory means, right? Or what winning means. This is when they change that, because they know that they know damn well that it's not going to go well for them. They won't be able to pay that political cost, even domestically, I don't think. And everyone's been harping on this, and it's true. They're not prepared. They're not prepared, so they're not going to win. And so they have to say, you know what, it's not necessary to go in on the ground. We don't have to do that. We already won. So we can declare victory and not go in and lose.
Look, ultimately, the victory. Look, the idea was to get to basically restore the northern part of Israel. That is the objective. To do that, you need to placate Hezbollah. That is not going to happen even with the killings that they've done. Hezbollah is still striking inside, even in Haifa and Tel Aviv. We know this not to be a fact. In fact, their strikes have become far more far-ranging in just the last couple of days. So obviously, the north isn't going to be secure. So what are they going to do? They're going to have to do the ground invasion. And that's where they've placed themselves in a situation where they can't win. But what's most concerning, I guess, is because they don't exactly have the military personnel anymore. I mean, so many of the IDF have had their soldiers sort of blown to pieces for the most part. I think something like, again, we don't even have a rough estimate because of the fact of the gag orders on the hospitals and the media in Israel, but something like 20 or 30,000, this was 5-6 months ago, were severely wounded and no longer going to be able to sort of participate in the IDF. And so, that's why, I've said this before, they've essentially put forward new legislation to impose upon Orthodox Jews to participate in the IDF, including providing asylum seekers with residency with the exchange of they'll participate in the IDF. So this goes to show the shortage of manpower that they have. So how are these people then supposed to face 100 to 150,000 Hezbollah fighters that are highly trained in their own terrain in the south of Lebanon?
All the volunteers coming too, right? Like I'm hearing coming from other countries.
100%. And this is where it gets, so the question for me is, will there be sort of, what kind of military manpower assistance will they have? Will the US be forced to sort of come in to save the day? Because they definitely can't do it on their own. And that's where, this could really escalate in a very serious way.
Here's the thing about that. Like we talked about, perhaps someone like a hawk like Tom Cotton fighting 2 failed occupational counterinsurgency operations over 20 years, drew the wrong lesson. And that lesson was, or a darker lesson. And that lesson was, you need to manufacture consent for the war. America won't really tolerate it. So the question is, is the U.S. in a position to tolerate sending more troops over to Israel to fight? I would argue that they're not. But again, we see these sensationalist articles about U.S. troop deployments to the Middle East. Sorry, I'm going to start saying West Asia. To West Asia, and they're mostly rotational. Like we're not seeing any.
I know the language is incorrect, and you should use the better phrasing. But I will tell you, I think you're going to confuse a lot of Americans who aren't familiar with that term. So you use what people understand, maybe.
Okay, fine. All right, for the sake of this podcast, we'll see what happens. But fine, to the Middle East, we haven't seen any ramping up of actual ground like combat troops in the region, with the exception of the combat air brigade. Combat aviation brigade. Combat Aviation Brigade from the 101st Airborne, replacing the one from the 10th Mountain Division. So, and troops do take a long time to mobilize. Like the amount of numbers you'd need for a ground invasion of Lebanon, is that going to happen overnight, Travis?
No, it's not. I think I'm going with the tack you're taking, which is because you said sensationalist, and I agree. And it's not that these things haven't been continuously happened. I mean, Elena touched on how much military presence there is in the permanent aircraft carrier that the U.S. views Cyprus as. But like the 10th Mountain, that unit's been there probably for a year. It's already been there. There was already a combat aviation brigade there. It just rotated out with a different one. But if you weren't paying attention, it looks like, oh, the 101st is sending an entire brigade, a helicopter, based brigade to there. It's like, no, it is, but it's replacing one that's leaving that's already been there. So I have yet to see a buildup that looks to me like, oh, we're actually intending to do any kind of ground operation. I have seen nothing, and I also think that I think that's I think it's really unlikely to get the U.S. to get involved in an actual ground campaign with actual U.S. troops. Fighting it as a proxy war through other people, absolutely. But doing it with U.S. soldiers, I don't think so. I still do not think so.
Yeah.
The Navy firing from the coast, the Navy shooting stuff down from the coast, the Navy targeting from the coast, that's completely possible. But ground troops, nah.
Yeah.
No, I think I was just going to say something, but I don't know if Greg wants to say something before I do.
Send it.
Okay. No, what I was going to say was I completely agree. I do think there's going to have to be, I mean, Israel's just incapable of defeating Hezbollah on their own if they go in for a ground invasion, which I think they probably will. So I think they're going to try to aid Israel through other forms, other proxies in the region. That's my understanding of things. However, if Israel doesn't succeed, they could effectively lose the north. I mean, they will effectively lose the north. And not just that, if Israel loses, if Western imperialism through Israel loses, this could be detrimental to the entirety of Western imperialism in terms of how they apply themselves to the rest of the world. Because something that I've reiterated multiple times, and I know Greg knows this, but I'll just say it again. If Israel even agrees to a ceasefire where they're essentially at the losing party, let's just put it like that, in Gaza as well as in the north, that will embolden the axis of resistance. It will embolden the entire region, and it will significantly weaken the imperialist interests in the region. And that is another reason why I feel they're going to be coerced to take action, because it's win or lose at this point. That's at the point of history that we are at the moment. Because again, I always try to include it within the greater context of what's happening globally in terms of the rise of multipolarity in the global south through other sort of organizations such as BRICS and the BRI. So these are counter interests here. If you allow the axis of resistance to embolden in that region, what does this mean for the BRI and how that manifests itself economically in countering Western imperialism? They can't afford that, especially if you're a profit-driven sort of capitalist. You do not want that to happen, because it will automatically destroy your innate structures. So that's why I believe this could escalate, but I just don't know how they're going to sort of maneuver around it. But proxies are definitely probably going to be used, because Israel most definitely cannot handle Hezbollah on their own. Or the axis.
I totally agree with you, I totally agree with you. Obvious proxies, one, and then two. But there's a lot of technological assistance, intelligence assistance, material assistance that can be delivered without putting actual U.S. uniforms on the ground. So I totally agree that the help will happen, and I agree also that them losing is catastrophic for some of the systems of power. Also, I will say you can't, like, a Navy destroyer can keep Hezbollah indirect fire, like rockets, missiles, mortars, technically, from hitting Israeli ground positions. But what it can't do is stop anti-tank missiles, and it can't stop infantry, and it can't stop landmines, and it can't stop EFP devices, etc. All these things which Hamas has been effectively attriting Israeli units with, and Hezbollah will be able to do the same, and they have way better stuff. To Greg's point, all Hamas has is tandem RPGs. Hezbollah has actual anti-tank missiles with 10K ranges on them that are much better at defeating heavy armor. So they're a much worse enemy, and you can't. The U.S. proxy and all systems other than like directly kinetic support, like direct shooting support, all those systems will not stop those things. It won't stop those things. Mm-hmm. So its ability to help a ground fight is limited. But it stays in that lane.
Here's the thing. According to this WAPO article, we have a banger of a quote. But Israeli forces have also learned recent lessons in Gaza, said Zahavi, a vocal advocate of a ground operation. Quote, "We've learned a lot from the warfare in Gaza in the tunnels, she said. Many of the lessons could be applied to the Lebanese arena as well. And of course, this article doesn't really go into what lessons they've learned. I don't see how they've learned.
If a military organization is set up to make rapid changes like that, it can happen, right? An example that I would give is Petraeus changes to U.S. counterinsurgency doctrine mid-war, and then that kicked off in 2007. That was a massive change tactically on the ground and how ground units behaved, and the results were massively different rapidly. Do I think the IDF have the structure, experience, and like systems to do it, to execute a change like that policy wise? No, I haven't seen. I don't see it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we brought this up earlier. If you haven't changed your overall like military doctrine and upgraded your like SOPs and TTPs, which they haven't done since 2006, they probably haven't done it since October 7th.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
So apparently there's water cooler talk. A ground invasion will begin next week. They do have the consent of the Israeli public now, because the Israeli public feels like, they've got the momentum, because Hezbollah's quote unquote been degraded. It's on the ropes. It's on its knees. And like Netanyahu now, Olmert in 2006 had also vowed to change the equation and the tit for tat raids and exchanges of fire across the border. But Olmert now believes, and this is according to the same WAPO article, that Netanyahu is bound by the right-wing extremists who are part of his government and is too focused on his political survival to make sure that any ground troops were withdrawn in a timely manner. So Netanyahu's national security minister, as we know, Itamar Ben-Gvir, has already threatened, and Smotrich, the finance minister, and like Israel Katz and all these crazy dudes, have already threatened to leave the government if the prime minister agrees to a ceasefire with Hezbollah. He made a similar demand over Netanyahu reaching a deal with Hamas, and Israeli troops are still in Gaza nearly a year after they launched their offensive. So a ground operation is the beginning. You never know when it ends. I've always said that.
Don't forget, Gaza didn't go anywhere. The Hamas presence is still there. So my question is, okay, cool. You're gonna do a ground invasion in northern Lebanon. What percentage of your army are you going to shift there, and what percentage of your army are you going to leave where it's already operating? Right? Are you going to shift 80% up there, and then what's going to happen in your backfield?
Yeah.
Right?
Also, not to mention their multi-brigade action in West Bank, where they're just bulldozing everything.
Yeah. Where are you going to shift these forces from? Because so many of them are already actively engaged. Who are you going to shift to go north? Are you pulling you guys? Is this where the new Orthodox units are going to go? That'll be a good time.
Yeah. Yeah, and Hezbollah is a far more sophisticated, larger military unit as well. And if you couldn't actually accomplish anything in terms of defeating the Al-Qassam brigades and the rest of the Palestinian sort of resistance in Gaza, where apparently the vast majority of them are still functioning within their brigades, and I think now within the south even of Gaza, you're seeing Hamas essentially regain its control. How on earth are you now going to go to Lebanon to try and get it, enter within their territory, which they know incredibly well, to handle 100 to 150,000 fighters? You couldn't even handle Hamas in Gaza. And frankly, you're just setting yourself up for grand failure in Gaza at this point. But I think because they reached a stalemate where they realize they can't win, they need to put forward this power play of, okay, well, we've at least restored the North, which they won't. They're not going to restore the North. That's not even going to happen. And in the end, they're going to self-destruct very gradually. It makes no. Yeah,
it doesn't make a lot of sense, and there's a lot of things we don't know and we can't know, especially like since Hezbollah is ramping down on operational security. We're probably not going to hear anything from them until they've elected a new secretary general in the Shura, which they'll do. I don't know who it's going to be. I don't think anybody really knows, and they're going to tighten down their security, so we're not going to really hear much from them. Israel has been threatening to invade from freaking ever. They seem closer now than ever, and because there's this idea that Hezbollah has been dismantled. In the last few minutes of the episode, just wanted to point out that Hamas in Gaza has operated in a very decentralized way. Certain units would have sectors. They would take independent action to affect complex ambushes and sniper operations and rocket attacks. And it's going to be the same thing in southern Lebanon. Again, just with a much larger, better equipped, more sophisticated force, just because they didn't have to train inside a concentration camp. So it's just insane. And I think you're correct. If it does happen, even if Hezbollah's chain of command is in disarray, which is completely probable right now, it's going to be the same thing as Gaza, but worse. And it will probably just end to the gradual destruction of the Israeli state, because they can't. They survive off of legends, the legend, the kind of this mythology, this legendarium of them. It stretches from the Middle East's only democracy, which gives them like legitimacy and Western backing, because I guess we uphold democracy or something. I read that in a blog somewhere. I haven't really seen it firsthand. Two, they have the most scariest military in the entire region. That's kind of, and they still might, because we back them unconditionally, but they're not able to attain or accomplish any of their strategic or operational goals. So if they have a military that can bomb the crap out of everything, but when it comes to actually having a set of objectives and you don't accomplish any of the objectives, well, that's an operational failure. So they're like really good at bombing stuff and also failing. I don't see how this changes in Lebanon.
They're able to conduct strikes. They've always been able to conduct strikes. I'm not convinced of their ability to do power projection on any significant thing. And you can't hold ground with a plane. That's not a thing. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or a tank you don't get out. You refuse to get out of.
or a tank.
Yeah.
The whole smoking pretty soon.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't think we can really get into specifics. I just want to do an episode about like the general overall situation. I don't think it's in broad strokes on the macro level changed in any significant way.
I was also going to say the IDF as well. It's not, they've never had a war that's gone on this long. They're not even trained. They're not even capable of doing extensive long warfare. This is why they're failing you guys. And now they're about to extend this into Lebanon, which is going to go far. It's going to extend it for a far longer period of time, because as soon as the airstrikes are done, and if they do invade, now we're going to be going into, this is going to be a war of attrition. And Hezbollah is going to,
sorry, go ahead. I don't want to.
Yeah, no. They're not going to be able to sustain this front, and it's good. And Hezbollah is trained to basically succeed in a war of attrition. For Hezbollah, it's a welcome. Come into Lebanon. Let's see you try. That is where they're going to excel. Yeah.
That's a comparison that people don't make enough, and it's so dead on. When you deal with Hezbollah versus the IDF, you're talking about a volunteer army versus a conscript army, and let's flip to the to the not great side of that. But one of the reasons that the U.S. was able to conduct 2 wars for 20 plus years at the same time is that's an all volunteer military. We don't have conscription, we don't have drafts. So if you're there, you raised your hand and said, yes, I'll go, send me. Israel's a conscript military. That's a conscript system. They have a very limited volunteer system, and it's conscription based, and they're calling up reservists, a lot of whom don't want to go. So not only that, I'm calling you out of your civilian life. You're a part-timer. I'm calling you out of your civilian life, and you're like, hey, it's okay. I'm just getting called up for a month, except it isn't a month, right? We're on a year.
Yeah.
It's going to keep going, and they're going to start. Yeah, to your point, you're going to start a war in southern Lebanon. Now we got to call up everybody, because you're going to need that. You're going to need the troops, and no one's. Hey, I don't care if your time's up. I know we said we'd only activate you for max 6 months, but guess what? You're going to fight for 3 years. How's that going to go in a conscript military-based system? It never goes well. You saw the U.S. reactions, because in Vietnam, U.S. was a draft-based. Well, it was a mix, but there was heavily amount of drafted troops, conscripted troops, and it's wildly politically untenable. You can get away with it much longer with volunteer militaries, but not with conscript armies. It does not work.
Yeah, and there were some very elite units, U.S. volunteer units in Vietnam that were completely devastating. That's where we kind of developed the entire Special Operations Corps. I mean, not great. It's just. That was the volunteer section, but the bulk of the infantry fighting force on the ground in Vietnam were draftees. They didn't want to be there. So
they don't want to be there. Some of them, mixed level willing to do it because that's a bone of contention in some areas. But the top piece though is they're not as well trained, because they're not, for lack of a better word, they're not professional soldiers. They haven't been doing it for their lives. Their leaders in this case, a lot of their leaders are reservists of very limited experience. And what experience they do have prior to Gaza, remember this, think how long ago this stuff was and how long people stay in the system, not that long. Most of their experience is low-grade police action. It's running checkpoints. It's not ground combat. It is not the same thing, man. It's not the same thing.
And they're about to go to Lebanon with 100,000 Hezbollah fighters who are trained for this, who live for this, who have so much disdain for the Zionist state of Israel that they're waiting for this to happen. And then there's also another conversation to be had, but just briefly to mention, of the economic impact it's going to have on Israel, which is already sort of crippling by the second. I mean, I think their credit rating was it's gone down again, I think earlier this week to A, which means that they're actually borrowing a huge amount of debt, which they won't even be able to effectively be able to pay off. I mean, most of their industries are shutting down, and tens of thousands of their businesses are closing. And investment now, foreign direct investment has significantly reduced. And now they're about to extend in another great another basic front, which is going to extend for a significant period of time by the looks of it. I don't understand. And again, we're talking about a very small country. I really don't see how they think they're going to win in the war of attrition on two fronts.
It's always amazing how apolitical credit agencies can be.
Not just that, I think investing in Israel right now from completely from the interest of capital, like if you do that, you are being fiduciarily irresponsible for your shareholders. That's why the Intel, the 25 billion, the multi-billion-dollar Intel factory, the chip factory that was supposed to be in Israel, got canned because Israel is fundamentally insecure. Israel is a country that's small. It has no strategic depth, which means there's not a lot of standoff between the front line of a conflict and its industrial centers. If a conflict actually kicks off, you can expect the Iron Dome to get overwhelmed. There goes water desalination plants. There goes the electrical grid. There goes industrial centers, and Haifa gets shut down. Ashdod gets shut down.
But I want to add something about that because it's important. But that's why Cyprus is being the biggest backup here, and it's annoying me immensely because, well, my government is the current party that's in power are basically a sort of CIA puppet state, but that's a whole other conversation. I have a huge loathing for this particular government, but I will say this: even now, there's all these agreements that were put in place, I think, in 2021 about the electric cable that's going to be going from Israel to Cyprus and Greece. So essentially, that's going to be providing electricity for Israel. And among, for example, like even I think I mentioned in the previous podcast, but I'll just say it again: the fact that we have these projects called like the Almathea project, which was meant to bring in supplies specifically for Gaza, which have never actually gone into Gaza, but have now. So we now have all these supplies, but they're going to be going to Israel instead. So what it looks like is like backup ports for Israel. So Cyprus is becoming a bit of that backup in case their ports and their infrastructure get damaged, because they are such a small country. So this is why Cyprus is being used in the way that it is, because they know that when Hezbollah decides to strike and generally the Axis, the whole country is at risk. All of Israel is at risk.
Yeah, and so it seems insane. It seems incredibly self-destructive to go ahead with this ground invasion. I don't see Hezbollah ever agreeing to a ceasefire, not now, especially when it's a separate ceasefire from the ceasefire in Gaza. I think that would be politically suicidal for Hezbollah. They would lose all credibility, and they're probably too pissed off from what they've endured over the past 11 days to even countenance that. I don't think the fighters would accept that.
There's also there's one small condition as well. They want to take huge chunks of Lebanese territory to establish a buffer between that and Israel. I mean, the audacity. Yeah, sure. Hezbollah is going to turn around and say, take a huge chunk of Lebanon so that you can establish your. The conditions are absolutely irrational. So, of course, Hezbollah is never going to accept something like that.
So, and that means Netanyahu's government either has to continue to endure the politically untenable situation to the north with tens of thousands of Israelis displaced, the economic situation in rapid deterioration there, and just be completely fine with that, or they're going to have to try and do something. A ceasefire is not going to work. They will never give them acceptable terms that both parties can accept. So I do think a ground invasion seems more likely than ever than ever. Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, has recently said that the operation for southern Lebanon was greenlit. People are saying we can expect it this week, and if that does happen, it's going to be insanely bad for everybody.
If they're going to do it, they should go now, right? Just from a purely strategic standpoint. If you're going to do it, if you're going to invade southern Lebanon, which I still, as we've all said, I think is a terrible idea. I don't think it's going to go well for you. But if you're going to do it, you should do it now, right? You've caused the most destabilization that you're going to get because, and we discussed. I think the impacts are much more limited than people think they are. But again, this is as disorganized as that command structure is going to get, right? Mm-hmm. People are going to go, okay, well, this is my job now. Guy's going to step to the left. He was doing this staff job. Now he's doing that staff job. And then they're going to roll on and continue functioning. So,
so they have
you're not going to have a better time.
Yeah. Their window of exploitation. Their window of exploitation gets less and less every day they allow this to pass on, because they don't. I would be highly surprised if they have another ace up their sleeve like the pager attacks and their attacks on their command structure. So if they're going to go now. Yep, I think we're at the end of our time. So that's where things stand right now. I know this was kind of a freeform Sunday afternoon conversation about all these things going on right now. That's our
late night chat for me. It's a late night chat for me over here.
Yes.
It's kind of a late night chat.
Yeah. Alina is in Cyprus, so we're going to let her go. I mean, we're all night owls around here, so
yeah,
you'll be up for a while. Thank you all for listening so much, and we will post another episode on this if a ground invasion begins. All right. Thanks y'all for coming on, and we'll see you on the next one.